Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome you to our Black History Month celebration. And so to get us started, I'll call on the president of SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University, Dr. Wayne J. Riley.
Thank you, Dr. Fraser. Good afternoon to all our friends and colleagues and students and other folks who are very passionate about healthcare and social justice. This is our observance of Black History Month at SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University. And I think the topic that we are going to hear from some esteemed members of the clergy is so timely given what's going on in the country these days. We sometimes forget how difficult the days were back in the civil rights era or the pre-civil rights era, before there was a Voting Rights Act, before there was the Great Society programs of President Johnson, and before all the other major transformations that have occurred in American society because of the civil rights movement. But it was never smooth sailing. And I think you're going to hear a little bit of that today from our esteemed colleagues. The civil rights movement was in some part fueled by a strong belief that faith can be put to action to improve people's lives. And it wasn't just the Christian members of the clergy, but it was also the Jewish members of the clergy who participated in some of the strategy sessions, the marches, the planning, the freedom rides in the Deep South, and indeed some Jewish members of our community lost their life because of their passionate belief in the civil rights of all Americans, regardless of their race or ethnicity. So we have a rich history in terms of the faith communities of the United States of America participating in the civil rights era. And it gives us a lesson to today, how relevant the faith community continues to be as catalysts for social change and social justice. And so I am very excited that we have these three fantastic members of the clergy who will bring their perspectives, their historical connection back to the civil rights era and how it's, again, germane to sort of the time period we're in now. So on behalf of all of us who are privileged to lead, to teach, to study, and to serve here at this great Downstate Health Sciences University, I want to thank Pastor A.R. Bernard, Reverend Kirkpatrick Cohall, Chair of our University Council, and then Rabbi Holtzman, our Rabbinical Chaplain, for the discussion that you three are going to lead, that I hope everybody will benefit by and from during this very important February 22 observance of Black History Week. So congratulations to all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Riley. And just to get us started on this very important discussion, I want to introduce our esteemed panelists. So first, I would like to introduce you to Reverend A.R. Bernard, and many of you may know him. He's a founding and senior pastor of the Christian Cultural Center, and that has a congregation of over 40,000 members. Dr. Bernard has served as a secretary, and he was introduced to Christ, and as a teenager, civil rights activist. He was a former member of the Nation of Islam before he surrendered his life to Christ. So we'll hear a little bit more about that. But one of the things that's really important about Dr. Bernard's work, that he has served as a mentor for many pastors, and he's also served in such a great capacity within the community in terms of building bridges within the community to others. I would also like to introduce you to Reverend Dr. Kirkpatrick Cohall, and Dr. Cohall is just down the street from us. And he's a senior pastor for the Lenox Road Baptist Church here in Brooklyn, and he has served in that capacity for over 25 years. He was also a medical technologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering. He's a graduate of New York Theological Seminary, as well as from Fordham University. And we would just like to thank Dr. Cohall for being here. Thank you for all the work that you do in our community, and we'll be able to hear a little bit more from you a little bit later. And at this time, I would also like to introduce you to Rabbi Holtzman, who has served as the chief rabbi of the East Flatbush Jewish community in Brooklyn, but more dear to our heart, is that Rabbi Holtzman is our Rabbinical Chaplain here at SUNY Downstate. And so we welcome you. We thank you also for all that you have done within the community. So to get us started, I would like us to view a video, and it sets the tone for some of the conversation we would like to have today in looking at theology and looking at the role of religion and faith in the civil rights movement. That Dr. Riley talked a little bit about that in his beginning, and we hope to have this throughout our conversation today. So let's look at this brief clip. It's just about 3 minutes, and we'll come back and have a wonderful discussion with each of you.
On October 12, 1958, 50 sticks of dynamite exploded near the entrance of the Hebrew Benevolent Congregation in Atlanta, Georgia. The attack wasn't simply a white supremacist assault on Jews, but an attack on the bond between the Jewish and Black communities in the South and their joint fight for civil rights. While no one was injured, the attack had a dramatic impact. And in the South, they lived under a system of racial segregation that came to be known as the Jim Crow laws. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld these laws by ruling in Plessy v. Ferguson that separate facilities were legal as long as they were equal. While this meant that state and local governments could have separate but equal services and facilities for Blacks and whites, in reality, Black schools, buses, train cars, parks, and more were underfunded and inferior, if they existed at all. In 1948, this synagogue-attending homemaker was chatting with her Black housekeeper, Helen Swan, and found out about the inferior conditions at Helen's children's school. A brand new school had just been built for the white children, while Black children were learning in a one-room school built in 1888. Housing codes in Kansas City discriminated against Blacks, Jews, and Catholics. This forced Jews and Blacks into the same neighborhoods and enabled the communities to recognize their shared struggle. Esther helped Helen and other Black parents form an NAACP branch, file legal action, coordinate a boycott, and she raised money from the Jewish community for the cause. She continued her activism despite harassment, an FBI smear campaign, getting fired from her job by her own father-in-law, and her husband being forced to resign from the Air Force Reserves on account of her activism. Over the previous half-century, Blacks and Jews had increasingly come together to fight discrimination. So by the 1950s, no one was surprised that Jewish activists made up a huge percentage of the non-Black people involved in the struggle. American Jews played a key role in the founding and funding of some of the most important civil rights organizations. While the murder of Black men in the South rarely made national headlines, news of the murder of 2 white activists further publicized the unchecked institutional violence of Southern segregationists. Just after Cheney, Goodman, and Schwermer disappeared, 17 rabbis were arrested alongside Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others. Their crime? Sitting and praying at a whites-only restaurant. This was no isolated incident. King shared a long, fruitful relationship with many Jewish leaders. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel walked arm in arm with Dr. King in his 1965 March on Selma, and Rabbi Joachim Prince warmed up the crowd for his good friend Dr. King to deliver his iconic I Have a Dream speech. AJC Treasurer Stanley Levison was a close friend of Dr. King. He drafted some of his articles and speeches, prepared his tax returns, and raised money for organizations that Dr. King supported. Dr. King counseled the congregants of B'nai Yehuda. One can deal with an unjust system and still maintain love for those who, perhaps by training, were caught up in the system. Overall, the role Jews played in the civil rights movement remains a source of pride and represents a meaningful bond between 2 communities that continues today. While there is no longer a conflict over civil rights in the Jewish community, time and again the Jewish people face internal strife. My hope is that the Jewish people, and all people, are able to embody Dr. King's words in B'nai Yehuda, persevering in the fight for justice while preserving love and understanding for one another.
How has your faith or your spiritual beliefs fostered your activism? And I'll talk in terms of thinking about that again. I'll repeat it. How is your faith or your own religious beliefs, the core beliefs that you hold, fostered your activism? And I'll start off with A.R. Bernard. So Reverend Bernard, I'll speak to you first about that. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Wow, that's what happens when your name begins with A and B.
Of course.
You get called on first. You know, I'm a product of the 1960s, that generation and that decade of every revolution imaginable. Growing up in Brooklyn, New York, being part of the busing program, the school desegregation program. I lived in Bed-Stuy, but was bused out to white schools in Queens. It sensitized me to become socially conscious and looking for an understanding, a framework with which to respond out of a faith escaped me. So I ended up in the Nation of Islam and then converted to Christianity. My time with the Nation was because I was looking to speak up in America, the American churches, Christian churches' failure to address the issue of African Americans in this country. So what brought me to the Christian context is I had my epiphany in 1975, but it was a study of the Christian social ethic, primarily two things. Number one, the life and dignity of the human person, which is a status conferred upon every human being from the moment of conception to the moment of death, irregardless of economics, education, name, family. Nothing interferes with that status. So the life and dignity of the human person as a Christian social ethic was very important. Secondly, is the common good and our responsibility to the common good. So those two things became very special to me and motivated my involvement in making a difference in how we treated the other in American society.
Thank you so much. And Reverend Kirkpatrick Cohall.
So I bring a slightly different perspective to this discussion. I grew up in Jamaica and came here as a young man at the age of 20 years old, and grew up basically in a Christian home, one that practiced faith and belief, not so much for this life, but for the afterlife. And so that was my framework of my faith beliefs and practices until I got here and found out that many of the denominations that I saw and heard of in the United States, especially in the South, I grew up Church of God, and they came to the islands as evangelists and missionaries, and found out that when I got here, what was thought of as equality in belief and practices in the West Indies was not so here. And so it put me on a different trajectory to find out and to study the history of religion in America, the history of African Americans, the history of slavery, and that helped to shape my own interpretation of the faith. And so it put me on a trajectory as I started out being a medical technologist, didn't find a sense of purpose there, then went on to seminary, and then Fordham's Graduate School of Education to pursue what's really going on here, and found out in the research that faith and religion must have a transformative component to it. We live here. We pay our taxes, we celebrate our community, and to see that historically there was so much bigotry and prejudice and hate from the time of slavery through Reconstruction, and then those horrible Jim Crow laws that were practiced and initiated by persons who call themselves Christians. And so there was that major contradiction that if faith does not transform the evils of society, then what is the worth or value of one's faith? And so that put me in a whole different category of how to now interpret scriptures, how to use my faith as a means of transforming society.
Thank you so much. And Rabbi Holtzman, the same question in terms of your faith and religious beliefs fostering your activism.
Thank you very much. As some of you know, that I'm a Chassid. A Chassid means a Hasidic rabbi, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, and Hasidic. I grew up by parents. My father of blessed memory was a Holocaust survivor that a few years when he was a kid was hidden by Gentiles all the way upper France to be grown up in a family that saved his life from the Holocaust. My mother, so by growing up by a father that was a selfless father, a father that was a chassid, that his whole life, and my parents, my mother also, their home was all about chassid means kindness, giving, helping other people, seeing another person and seeing their light and their soul and seeing who they are and the truth and the essence of them, that brought me into eventually being able to be a real chassid, following the holy Reverend Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe's focus in the world, as we all know, that he did to make a better world, to make every person, when I'm gonna have time, I'll be able to share the story with how do you call it, with the Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, that he made her happening, what she did, etc. So, and then I was privileged enough to be an emissary of the holy Lubavitcher Rebbe, to be a beacon of light, to bring light in the entire world, to make the world a better world. How? By finding everyone, telling them, feeding them, appreciating everyone should appreciate their light. And that made me also, if you didn't mention the bio, all the organizations that I'm involved with, helping people, giving food or helping them with other medical things, and etc. And this is what made us all happen, be here, and hopefully together we're going to make a real beautiful world.
Thank you so much. Clearly, you all are activists in your own rights. You have done this work for such a long time. And sometimes I wonder if we have done enough. So when we think about the church, to the state of the church, when we think of the state of the temple, when we think of the state of the clergy today, do you think that we are doing enough to promote social justice causes? I'll start with you, Reverend Cohall. In terms of thinking where we are today, are we doing enough to promote the social justice causes?
Well, if one does a qualitative study of the church, and I think we also need to define what we mean by the Black church. The Black church is primarily composed of denominations with a significant amount of Black people. And I don't want to use the word so much African Americans, because there are so many other Black groups in this country that would not consider themselves. But the Black church, if you do a qualitative study of the Black church, you will find that there are certain gaps in social activism. In the 1950s and 60s, churches were mobilized. Black churches, for the most part, were mobilized to fight the injustices and the prejudices and all of those unjust laws. Now we're living in a kind of different era. And the era that we find ourselves in is to some extent defined by what we see on Christian television, especially from African-American pastors. There's a sense that the church's role now is to produce individuals who have aligned themselves with the prosperity gospel, that God is going to make you this rich person. But in terms of the coalescence of what we saw in the 60s, the times have changed, and there are shifts in how prophetic preaching is being done. There is so much more that we can do as a church of people of color, but we're not as united as I would want us to be. We're not as committed to the same common cause. In a sense, we have become more individualistic in our goals and in our pursuits rather than coming together. That's why you will see, literally, Brooklyn is the borough of churches. You'll see so many churches on one block, and on any given Sunday, you will see churches right across the street, in a sense, competing with each other. So I think, yes, there is so much more to be done. Clergy need to understand that they have been called not just to prepare people for the afterlife or the pie in the sky or to live a prosperity gospel, but they are the hands and feet of God, of Jesus Christ, in a world that has become corrupt, in a world that has sustained a sense of evil. And so, yes, there is so much more that we can do. There's so much problems plaguing our community. SUNY Downstate is one of our premier hospitals. And we find in our community, more people are sick with diabetes and fewer people have access to good health care. The educational system is not where it should be. Black males are incarcerated in our prisons at such a high and alarming rate. Yes, the church needs to do more.
Yeah, and Reverend Bernard, in terms of doing more, what are so many things that you think that we can do? If we need to do more, what are so many things that we can do in terms of addressing the social ills that we see within society today?
I'd like to build on what Reverend Kirkpatrick said, because it's so true that in our struggle for a place in American society, the last 4 decades, the Black church has been exposed to this whole idea of radical individual is about me. And when they read the Bible, it tends to be a Bible not representing community, but the individual. So scriptures that are to the community are taken for the individual. And that has been a serious problem. I mean, in our church, we try to balance that. God does want us to prosper, to have a position of thriving within society and within our life, but we also couple that with social responsibility. So I think that the Black church especially is rediscovering its voices, that it has a redemptive voice, which is a ministry of reconciliation and healing, our moral voice to uphold a standard of right and wrong. You know, the church religion brings a moral value consensus that's necessary for a justice and a concord within a society. I think we're rediscovering our moral role, because every decision that impacts human life is a moral decision. And that leads to our prophetic voice and our capacity to discern patterns and trends and that are constructive or destructive to our communities, and to hold those in power accountable, responsible, and urge them to measure their judgments and decisions, especially when it comes to policies and practices and systems and structures, by God's perspective on the life and dignity of the human person and the common good. We've all continued within the church to exercise our humanitarian voice and bring healing and hope and our food pantries, et cetera. But I think that we're a place where we are reawakening our social responsibility and the need to engage in activism besides prayer, in development, in responding to the social needs, and no longer be judged by this generation that the church is irrelevant.
Yes, that's good. And Rabbi Holtzman, in terms of thinking, I like what you said, Reverend Bernard, in terms of rediscovering our moral role. And so, Rabbi Holtzman, I would like to ask you, what is that in terms of us rediscovering our moral role? What's our moral role should be, given everything that has been going on within our society?
Thank you. If I may add, and before we start off, simple saying, and that's related, alluding to civil rights. Every human being was created for a purpose. When God created the human beings, he created them for a purpose. And if they are here, they have to be fruitful. They have to do something. They have talented. This, first of all, leads us to the idea that civil rights meaning is that every person is here, and those doesn't make a difference what they are. And that's why the Bible brings down right in the beginning, by when Noah went out, it says, in the image of God, the person was created. Meaning is, when you see another person, you know that they are in the image of God. Meaning is that you can't say we did enough. I think that United States of America is doing unbelievable compared to generations, to the decades, to the centuries before. However, being that we're still here and we have to still do things, so we're here to make a better world and a better things. So if you don't mind, I will share with you what I started to say before about the Holy Lubavitcher Rebbe directing the Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm. If it's okay, may I just share with you? It takes a minute of an unbelievable story. That when the Shirley Chisholm, actually, by the way, she was honored by President Obama with giving receiving a Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor in the United States. But she was the first Black female to being elected in Congress in winter of 1968. Some of you remember, if not, whichever anyway, but this was a very major milestone. But she comes from here, right next door from here. She covered the 12th district, which is also Crown Heights. She lived a block away of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And she came to the Rebbe to get a blessing to be elected. And after she was elected, if you know, we were speaking about the civil rights, what happened in 68, and when she was elected and you had the whole Southern, I don't want to say what, but you know, in the political arena, what they said, we're going to teach her a lesson. What did they give her? They put her in the committee of agriculture. And when she became in the committee of agriculture, she was very, very upset. And then she gets a call. She gets a call of the secretary of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. We're talking about the holiest person in the world, the leader of the entire world, the person that really made moment of silences and everything to be making an unbelievable world. And she gets a call that he wants to see her. And she, sure enough, she goes to see him. And when she sees him, he's asking her, "Are you upset?" So she said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe tells her, "I know you're very upset." She says, "I'm upset, I'm insulted. What should I do? They put me in agriculture. The New York Times had an article mocking her. What is she going to do with agriculture in Brooklyn? Where's there a tree in Brooklyn? What are you going to do?" And the Rebbe told her, "Look, you got something and you are able to do it. You have agriculture. Do you know that the United States of America has a lot of food that they throw out? Find a way how to make use out of it. Find something." And she walked out. She comes to Congress. She meets a young guy called Bob Dole, which was just elected in senator. And he tells her that he has in Kansas, he has farmers, but he doesn't know what to do with the food over there. They're throwing it out, and people started to buy from Cuba, etc., etc. And then it dawned her. And that's when it started to be the idea, we all know, food stamps, WIC, that's her. That's her. She made in 1973, she had a lot of obstacles, but she made it happen. She made feed the hungry. She made feed the needy, the people that really are an emergency case. That's what she did. By what? By following what the Lubavitcher Rebbe did. And she could have raised that and said, "You know what? I did everything. I can't do nothing." There's no obstacle. She's there for a mission. And she did it. And we got to say thank you for her for doing it. Thank you to listening. And when she passed away in 2005, but beforehand, she always used to say there was the grand Rebbe, and because of him, we reached and we achieved what United States of America reached. So I say with that, obviously we can always do more, and we should never underestimate that the sky is the limit.
Thank you so much. And what you shared also talked about the intersectionality within Jews and the church, a Black church, in terms of the civil rights movement. And that was something that we saw rabbis that walked with Martin Luther King, and we saw the video that highlighted some of those things. And I know that there were lots of other groups as well, that a lot of religious groups, not just Christians, not just Jews, that supported the civil rights. And so, Reverend Bernard, I just wanted to know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that in terms of like the other groups that have played a big role as well, a supporting role in the civil rights movement.
a year before the Civil Rights Act was passed in 64, it was in July of 63, which was a week after a series of meetings in the South. But on July 9th of 63, there was a so-called top secret meeting at the University Club here in New York. It included a Father John Cronin from the National Catholic Welfare Conference, a Rabbi Philip Hyatt from the Synagogue Council of America, and someone from the Justice Department to develop a working relationship between the major religions. Well, you have to understand, it was a process of time to get the churches involved. The Black Church of necessity was involved, but you had major organizations like the National Council of Churches who during the 50s refused to weigh in. And they had under their watch the mainline Protestant denominations in America, and also some African-American congregations and leaders. But right up to Emmett Till, they refused to get involved. And it took a new generation to emerge of leaders who then pushed the National Council of Churches, because they were the most influential body, to begin to rethink their involvement. So it was a process of time that the church went through, especially the white church in America, to understand their responsibility to affect this kind of change. So, it's been a checkered past. When we think about the Catholic Church, if I may continue for a moment, I shared that I was part of the desegregation program. We were bussed out to white schools. So I grew up in two cultural and racial contexts. But I was also exposed to Christian schools. And these were called Christian academies. They became Christian academies after they were threatened by IRS to lose their tax-exempt status, because the Christian academies began as segregated academies in reaction to the desegregation of public schools. And that was the Southern church, the white evangelical church, not just in the South, but up here in the North as well, pushing back against change. And it was the Catholic Church and the communion of Jewish and Catholic leaders who stood and said, well, we're not going to allow that to happen. And the Catholic Church especially stood up and voiced its support and opened its doors to desegregation. So when we look back at the church's involvement, the church in America has had a checkered past. Not the Black church, but the white church in America has had a checkered past when it came to supporting civil rights and change. I think that much of that has changed, but in this season that we've experienced over the last 5, 6, 7 years here in America, we are seeing a polarization that we have not experienced since the 1960s, where people are doubling down racially, doubling down politically, and the church now has to once again step up, unify, and push back against what's going on in our society.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Because as we think about the connection that brought us together as different faiths and so on in the civil rights movement, and we think about where we are now, sometimes I wonder if Martin Luther King was to be here today, what do you think his thoughts would be about where we are now? Reverend Cohall?
Yeah, if certainly if Dr. King was here, because of his passion for justice, I think Dr. King would say to all of us that the work is not done. The work is not over. There is still so much more for us to do. In terms of our relationship with our Jewish brothers and sisters, I think one of the coalescing forces that bring us together and has historically brought us together was our common history of being an enslaved people. And African Americans see themselves in the same light of the Exodus story, which is a part of the Torah. However, what we have not achieved is that I don't think our history as a people and the common struggle that we have is known or talked about or preached in our churches. So you can have a whole generation of people not realizing that Jews were a part of the civil rights movement. They lost their lives. Their synagogues were bombed. We have this thing in common, but the stories are not being told, especially from our Christian churches, and even more so from our white churches. What you now see, especially in the South, is they're trying to sanitize books and information that speaks the truth about slavery. And much of this is coming from white evangelicals. And so there is in a sense that if we're going to get back to fixing a broken system that we have here in America, and Dr. Bernard talked about in the last 5 years, I don't think racism and bigotry had disappeared from the 60s. It was just undercovers and leadership in the United States that was so antagonistic to progress and to racial justice and equity opened it up. And now we're seeing, since President Obama, now we are seeing the kind of viciousness and extreme politics on both sides being practiced also by the church. And I think if we are really going to get back to the basics, then get back to our faith, then we have to tell the whole story. In the same way, the Bible is not just filled with good, tidy, sanitized stories. The Bible is filled with all kinds of different evils perpetuated by nations upon nations, by individuals. And so the whole story needs to be told. And I think it is forums like this that help us. I had an opportunity years ago when I just started pastoring to perform a wedding with a Jewish rabbi. And this was something that was new and somewhat strange to me, because we did not know that yes, we have all of these things in common, that we're truly one people. As the rabbi says, we are created in the image of God. And when I see you, I see the image of God in you. And when you see me, you should also see the image of God. So there is so much more work that needs to be done by the church.
Yeah, and at the Arthur Ashe Institute, a lot of the work that we do centers around social determinants of health and looking at all the different health inequities and making sure people are linked to services and so forth. And so when I think about theology and liberation theology, and I think about how could one be a Christian, or you could say that you're a Christian, you're following these rules, and how do we turn a blind eye, so to speak, to the blatant inequities that are happening within our communities. So I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that when we think about Christianity and what our core values should be, and turning a blind eye on the things that are happening. So Reverend Bernard, I see you smiling, so I would say that's you, and then Rabbi Holtzman, you're next.
No problem.
I smile because historically we can get people excited about addressing inequities in society. We've just come out of COVID, and up here in New York, we were the epicenter, right? Or coming out of COVID, we were the epicenter. And if anything it exposed is the inequities in our systems and structures in terms of delivering healthcare, inequities in servicing people, especially Black and Brown people. And you look at Black Lives Matters, you look at the protests and all of this, and people get excited about change around equity until they talk about how much it's going to cost. And all of a sudden, the conversation changes. That's why I'm smiling, because I've been in panel discussions, I've been in conversations where people are saying, yeah, we've got to do this. But then when we think about the cost, not just financially, but the cost to your reputation, the cost to your agenda, people begin to think differently. And that's one of the reasons why the wheels of change can move so slowly. And I would love and invite anyone to respond to that.
So Rabbi Holtzman.
If you don't mind, I'm just thinking that the Psalms finishes off with, Psalm 104 finishes off with the phrase, you should end all sins. And the Talmud teaches us all sins, but not all sinners. Being a follower of the Holy Lubavitcher Rebbe and an emissary of him, he always preached with love. Always taking the entire Bible and whatever we see over there and any punishment that we see, he had a whole talk, 4 hours about incarceration, how it's wrong, and how to bring out the good of the people. He had a whole 4-hour talk after Dr. King was assassinated, how it was disturbing not to see between people. How can someone not see the goodness and the lightness of others? So I do want to mention that in the Talmud brings down, there was an argument between Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is a famous scholar about 2,000 years ago, before the temple destroyed, and he said that the biggest thing is to love your fellow friend. And then the Midrash tells us that his colleague told him, Ben Azai told him, no, there's a bigger phrase. What? In the beginning of Genesis, it says, this is the book of the birth of the human. This is the history of the people. So the commentary explained, what does it mean? It means like this: when you love someone else, you're going to love them like yourself. So if you don't want to have a nice piece of sandwich, something good, you don't want to have something good, so you deprive the other one also, because you're going to share with them what you like. You say, I don't need it, you don't need it. But when you say that the Bible teaches you that this is the creation of the human being, so even if you don't like it, but you see the light, you see the godness, you see that that person has a different, as a light, then you feel, you know it him. The Holy Rebbe said to Mayor Dinkins, Mayor David Dinkins came to visit the Rebbe on a Sunday afternoon to take dollars. Every Sunday he gave out dollars to everyone. To anyone, man, woman, Jews, non-Jews, children, adults, everyone. And Mayor Dinkins came and they had a talk. And then when Mayor Dinkins told him the two communities, the Rebbe told him one people. The Holy Rebbe, every word was calculated. He didn't say one community. He said one people. There's no such a thing as one community, and then you have another community in the south or in the west. Everyone is a person and the image of God. If you look at them and you feel at them, then we are all together, and that's how we work. And thank God that we grow with that. However, we have a lot to do, but that's why it's so important, a forum like that, a panel like that, to say that for civil rights is not only logically, it's religion, it's believing, knowing that everyone is a child of God. That makes you really, that you feel the other person's right, and that makes you feel the right too.
Yeah, I as you all are talking, one of the scriptures that usually came to me is Micah 6:8, when it talks about, show me, oh man, what is good and what does God require of you, right? And it's to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly before your God. And on something else that we were reading, as some of the readings that are going to be shared with others, it had likened the march on Washington to the tearing down of the walls of Jericho, and the march that caused it to the march that resulted in that being torn down. And I wanted to ask you all, what are some of those walls that we really need to tear down today in like our society, the different walls and the different structures that we really need to tear down, and also thinking about how are some of the ways we may need to do that. So I haven't heard from you recently.
All right, I'll quickly, before I quickly just give some suggestions about the walls, I wanted to add something to what Dr. Bernard mentioned in terms of when it comes to funding programs and to change the inequities in society. Here's one of the challenges I face as a pastor in the community. I try not to get too close to politicians, in the sense that I would lose my prophetic voice if I am too close to what they're doing. And this is kind of a warning to the persons who are leaders in church, clergy, that if you lose your prophetic voice, if you can no longer speak truth to power because of what you personally gain from the relationships with politicians, then you're going to lose your ability to speak on the moral obligations of budgeting. There is enough money to fund our communities. There is enough money to bring new hospitals and decrease the inequities in healthcare. We suffered in our community, in the 43rd Assembly District. We suffered greatly with the most people dying from COVID last year and from the year before. And so if you talk about a wall, that's a huge wall in our community. The wall that prohibits us from accessing good and adequate healthcare, preventative healthcare. If we're talking about walls, we are looking at walls of educational inequity, the walls of not having proper housing. My daughter is graduating from law school in a couple of months from now, and to tell her the honest truth, she will not be able to afford a house in Brooklyn. The prices have just gone out of the roof. And so if you're talking about how do we take down these walls, walls have to come down when politicians realize that they have a moral obligation, not just to be re-elected, but to serve the people in ways that will bring about the transformation of society. In fact, I said it in my definition of religion. Religion should provide more than just identity and meaning and value. Religion needs to deal with the transformation of inequities in our society. And so as Joshua marched around that wall 7 times, and it took him 7 times, according to what the biblical text says, that these are not going to be easy times for us. Walls don't come down easily, especially when they have been embedded in the societal structure for all these years. So yes, the walls will come down through education. The walls will come down through the kinds of relationships that we have with our legislators, that we can speak truth to power constantly, and not feel intimidated that we are breaking our relationship with them and they will no longer supply the resources that we need.
If I may join in here, because I think it's important that we understand that we need a Mordecai and an Esther. We need someone who's going to be outside the king's court and speaking truth to power, engaging that prophetic voice, but we also need someone who's going to be on the inside in a very careful relationship, using that influence to like I said earlier, get those in power to make their judgments and decisions from God's perspective, someone to hold them accountable. So I think that it takes both. I believe and took the time to build relationships with those who are in positions of power, who are in seats of power. But I made sure along the way that I owed them nothing, and they had nothing that they can tempt me with. So you have to have it settle in your mind that you're going to go into this and build these relationships and make sure that, you know, you control the relationship, they don't. With that said, a framework for dismantling these walls, these inequities, it begins with prayer. That's very important. I believe in the power of prayer to deal with those forces that would look to continue to marginalize, disenfranchise, oppress, and exploit certain segments of the population. I believe it's going to take advocacy. You know, people have to get in there and advocate for those laws that will make life better and against those laws that continue the marginalization. It's going to take activism. Those who are willing to show up and stand on the steps of City Hall or wherever they're going to stand and have their voices heard. It's going to take protests. It's going to take convening, and it's going to take development. And on the development side, to respond to the situation that Reverend Cohall's daughter is in, we are about to go shovels in the ground in the second quarter of 2023 to build a $1.2 billion development project, which is going to respond to the issues of housing in our communities. And instead of it being a one income ban, low income ban, to warehouse poor people and have no future for them except the future that they see leaving the community, we created a situation where there's mixed income, allowing for upward mobility, retail, commercial, educational facilities, 24-hour childcare, and medical facilities. We had to get to the place where we had the capacity as a church to do this, but it is one of the things that we do to engage society and make change.
Before Rabbi Holtzman comes to give his remarks, I just want to remind our audience out that you can put your questions in the chat and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So Rabbi Holtzman.
There's a quote in the Talmud: a word is one, silence is worth two. Comes to politics, I don't know which side to take, but the bottom line is, I do know one thing, that we have to reach out to go to whoever is the underprivileged, the privileged, and everyone together. There's no such a thing saying someone is here, someone is there. We're all together, and I will share with a quote of the Parsha of the week. Parsha of the week is, I mean, Dr. Bernard just mentioned Mordechai and Esther. It's very appropriate because Purim is coming up. So I'm gonna mention about the week. The Torah, the Bible, is divided in 53 portions, and every week has that portion. This portion is talking about, and we add something that's called the coins when they went out of Egypt and they had to build a tabernacle. So the Bible says that you should take from each one of your, you should take 10 coins, which equals half a shekel. And then the Bible explains 20 geras, 20 coins is one, and you should take a half a shekel, half of it. This you should give donation. Bible does not have one extra letter, not even a vowel extra. Everything is calculated. That means that even a vowel, so a letter. Why do you tell me take half, and then it tells you, and then it tells me half is 10, then it tells me 20 is complete, and half of 20 is 10, and take the 10. Why do we say twice, 3 times? To say that we are only half. God is the other half. When you are in the image of God, when you look on someone else and you see the image of God, the God sees your half in the due image. That's when we can build together, and that's how we get together, and that's what makes it all happen. So for sure that we have to make schools, definitely schools, education. We gotta see that everyone should have an education. If I have a second, I want to just tell you, there is something called right, and there's something called negative right and positive right. This negative right means that you have free speech. Negative right, no one is going to deny you from speaking. You can talk and talk and talk. Positive right is like education. That's a positive right. Not only you're allowed, they have to help you. So the same thing goes with religion and with everything else. All the pantries, everything. We have to make sure that everyone has a beautiful life in United States, and not only, everyone should be together in a beautiful situation.
Thank you so much. One of the questions I wanted to ask, you are all leaders, and you've all been in this space of leadership. What would you say to someone that's in the laity, or someone that's a lay person in your church or in your congregation, wherever? What would you say to them about what their role should be in thinking about addressing social justices and thinking about just addressing the issues that we see within our communities that are ravaging our communities? What should their role be? If they say that, well, you are leaders, you're empowered to do this, you've done this all the time, what would your response be? So Rabbi Holtzman?
I'm sorry, I know I just finished, but I'm just going to jump in, because the Lubavitcher Rebbe tells all the time, and that's what I keep preaching to everyone. I don't want you should be a follower. You be a leader. I demand and ask everyone, be a leader. You're here to lead and to make a better world. Help. God gave you talent, use it.
Dr. Fraser, I will add to what the Rebbe just said. I think every leader should have a transformational component to their leadership style. And by that, I mean, people will listen to you, especially younger and leaders that are emerging. They will listen to you if they see that your life and your actions model what you preach and teach. One of the great contradictions that we have, especially in religious circles, is that the leaders do not reflect in their actions what they teach or preach. But I think when you identify persons within your congregations, as I have, we have leaders in different roles. There is no barrier in terms of gender roles. We believe men and women come with gifts that they could use. But it is important for us, I think, as pastors, to realize that we are being watched. And the greatest example that we can create is to see those who are emerging, those who are followers to what we are doing, that they themselves carve out a path. Might not be a similar path to what you as a leader is doing, but they carve out their own path. And along the way, you teach them the components of justice, of righteousness, of values, of prayer, as Dr. Bernard says, and to see them shape their own destiny. Then I think you won't have a problem in having the baton dropped when you pass it on to the next generation of leaders. In the same way, when I go to the hospital and I go to the graduations and I see the young doctors, some of them look as though they're in high schools, but all of those young, amazing professionals, they have done what they needed to do. They went through a process. They were taught by quote unquote elders. They were taught by people who were advanced in the profession. And then now they're taking it to the next level. So it's important for us to have a transformational component, that we don't see ourselves as the end of the story, but a part of the story which is passed on to the next generation.
Thank you, Dr. Bernard. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I want to maybe expand a little bit more on the framework for dismantling inequitable social systems. Again, prayer. I mean, let me, if there's anything I could really capture here, it's for people to understand, know your lane. You can't do everything. You've got to know how you're wired. You've got to know your gifts, talents, and abilities. You've got to know your God-given personality, and then know the best place to apply that. So if you are in the spiritual context and that's where God's called you to pray, prayer is essential. It's so important. Evil traffics in deceit, injustice, and chaos. And we have to pray for that truth, justice, and order prevail. So prayer. If your lane is convening, then if you have a platform that you can share with voices that have an informed message, or a platform that you're willing to lend for conversation to, then lend that platform, build that platform, invite people to that platform. If your lane is advocacy, then get out there and advocate for policy, policy, laws, practices, and that provide restorative justice to affected communities, and advocate against those policies and processes that reinforce discrimination and marginalization and disenfranchisement. As I said, if your lane is activism, become vocal, even carefully and legally disruptive against these broken systems in a way that makes the status quo untenable or so inconvenient that change is the only alternative. That's what the civil rights movement did. It made the status quo untenable. It forced change. If your lane is protesting, then specific acts of protest that involve the gathering of people organizing around an issue, then do that. And if your lane is development, replacing broken systems and structures with fair and equitable systems and structures, then do that. If you're in housing, if you're in economic development, if you're in education, wherever you find yourself, all right, know your lane, and then bring your gift, talents, abilities, relationships, and personality to that lane in order to affect change.
Thank you so much. And I've been told I need to get ready to wrap up. One of the questions, I had a question from an audience member that asked about how is the church helping with the mental illness issues that we have within our communities when we think of even post-COVID, well, not post as yet, but COVID and what our environment has been. So I wanted just briefly to find out what you are doing within your churches or your places of worship regarding mental health. So Reverend Bernard.
Well, we actually, COVID has inspired us to expand our pastoral care to include mental health screening and referral. We're not in the mental health business, but we can triage people and then refer them to the places that will give them the best help. I think this millennial generation has done an incredible job of removing the stigma around mental health. So their generation is making it easier to say, hey, maybe I do need to see a therapist. Maybe I do need to sit and talk with someone. So we encourage that. And again, we place ourselves as a triage and then refer out to existing organizations or professionals. Part of our development project that I mentioned earlier, we're actually having as part of the medical piece, a mental health piece to go along with that. This generation has the highest rate of depression and suicide than any former generation. And the church needs to be there on the cutting edge, helping to make a difference. Those of you clergy who were involved in the response to 9/11, you know that clergy became frontline responders because many of the individuals, our first responders, did not want to talk to mental health. They rather speak first to their rabbi, to their priest, to their minister, to their imam. So things have changed over the last 20 years when it comes to the church's involvement in issues of mental health.
Thank you. Rabbi Holtzman, what's your congregation, your synagogue, what are they doing in terms of mental health?
Okay. Me, my own personal involvement with chaplaincy, and what we got out from this whole era is that we're now going, God willing, we're aiming to buy a building for the entire East Flatbush Jewish Community Center with help of many that listening into, et cetera, et cetera. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar establishment. One of the main reasons is because we want to have a wellness center specifically from this era that we learned from that, what we have to do and how to tackle that. And we should all be able to bypass all those big obstacles that we had till now and should go smooth. So that's one thing that we did. And there's quite a lot of things under endeavor.
Reverend Cohall?
Yeah, so I think in terms of our holistic ministry, where we concentrate on several aspects of the human condition, I think what we have done, as Dr. Bernard talked about, is to help to reduce the stigma associated with mental health concerns. And a key concept for us going forward is partnership with the professionals, partnership with those who have the experience and training in mental health counseling. Right at this present moment, we are in partnership with Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital, where they come in and they do mental health counseling and training and make themselves available. So the church does not need to reinvent the wheel where this is concerned. We do have good working partners from our hospitals, from our community. And one of the things, as this is Black History, I also need to state that it is important for us and for members of my congregation in particular to see mental health professionals who look like the congregation, who look like the people in the community. So we encourage our young people to go on to those schools, to those professional schools, to get the training and to come back into the community and serve. So yes, we're doing all that we can, especially for clergy. So many of us have gone through so much over the last 2 years, funerals, and some of us have experienced our own personal family loss, sickness, and all of that. And some churches have closed. Some churches, because of their size, their resources, are not able to reopen. And so you have leadership in churches that are wondering, where is God in all of this? Where is the God who I have served for all this time? And so persons like that, persons like myself and others, we do need to find the help, build our relationships with others similar in our community. And there is help out there. There's lots of help available. And so it's key in partnering with those who have the necessary skills and commitment to fight this disease.
Thank you all so much. I could continue this conversation for a long time, but I know we're out of time. I want to thank Reverend Bernard for being here and for lending your voice to this important conversation. I would like to also thank Dr. Kirkpatrick Cohall for being a part of this conversation this afternoon. And of course, Rabbi Holtzman, we thank you for being a part of this. And so on behalf of SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University, we thank you for being a part of our Black History Month celebration and conversation, looking at social justice, looking at the role of the clergy and the role of religion and faith in the civil rights movement. And as you have said, we have more to do, but we can, once we put our heads together and think about the moral issue and the moral responsibility that we have to make sure that we rise above inequities, but we address those social injustices. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.